After the keynote address, a workshop titled Smart Water Management: Challenges and Opportunities for Pakistan was moderated by Professor James Westcote of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The panel consisted of Dr. Sally Benson from Stanford University, Dr. Bakshal Lashari, Mr. Arif Nadeem, Mr. Khalid Mohtadullah, and Dr. Abu Bakr Muhammad, Director of the Center for Water Informatics and Technology at LUMS.
Panelists, Mr. Arif Nadeem and Khalid Mohtadullah and Sally Benson and Abu Bakr and Dr. Lashari. Okay, now there's always, when you plan something, there's always a surprise. In this case, a very pleasant surprise, in that we have two slides by Dr. Shaukat Hamid. These two slides deal with an aspect of the Indus Basin Water Challenge that was not mentioned up till now. We had an enormous survey and a wonderful one by Mr. Mohtadullah. These two other aspects of the flood disaster, and also of some of the precision agriculture that's coming in and being a new contribution to improving the productivity and efficiency of agriculture that links the agriculture and irrigation fields. Now, this is the first slide. So would you like to say something, sir?
Area underwater, to give you in perspective, is about 36 to 38% of the land area of France. And all this water flowed down to the sea in just a short period from July to September, about 6 weeks, in fact less than that. But this is an argument of this is the water which flowed down. What went aside and never flowed in, of course, maybe recharge the aquifers is another thing. Next one, please, just one more slide. And this something came out of my labs. It saves 31 to 37% less water. Less water is used for agriculture because the land is more or less flat. So better spread of fertilizer. And without changing anything, about 18% higher yield. And we're grateful to Mr. Mushtaq Gill, I don't know if he's here, the government of Punjab. He was a strong champion in the Punjab, and we got a lot of subsidy from the government. So we have a problem supplying these to the local farmers. And just one other thing, sorry, it's not in the slides. Shalimar was mentioned by Abu Bakr. Now there's a whole new possibility opening for studying aquifer movements and others through isotope-based hydrology. And the Atomic Energy Commission has done a lot of work on this. Put you in touch with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think the reference was, Shalimar, was that the Pakistan Institute of Nuclear Science and Technology did a tracer study of the flows through Shalimar Garden. Now we have a panel discussion. We had a fantastic presentation by Khalid Saab, and it was so broad and so comprehensive that when we asked at the center what would be one of the most strategic steps to take in the near term, what would you suggest? And collectively, I think this will add up to a very interesting set of ideas. But this will be first question will be near term, second question will be more medium term, and the other one will be much longer term. But with the near term, if you're looking at all of these issues, what would you see as a great strategic opportunity for this Water Informatics and Technology Research Center to address?
One of the issues which is staring us in the eye is that River Ravi, at this particular point of time, if we compare it, it is one of the most polluted rivers in the world, actually. And incidentally, when this river gets diverted at Baloki, the water is used both for irrigation as well as for drinking purposes in the districts of Bhavalnagar as well as Bhavalpur. Now, frankly, the contaminants which are draining into it at this particular point of time are the entire industrial waste of Faisalabad, Kasur, Lahore is getting into this particular thing. And it's a huge issue. And this is, I feel, an issue which a university like LUMS a center like WIT can take it on. I'm not saying it's something which can be solved, but wherever this has been solved or wherever this has been tackled, there an academia, the university has been center stage in trying to address this particular thing. We'll be requiring a lot of stakeholders, quite a lot of participants joining hands. But this is something which is worthy of taking on. And I thought that this could be one of the things. I don't know whether it's medium or short, but it's pretty long, you know.
But it certainly is immediate in its significance. Dr. Lashari.
I think when we look at the presentation given by this Khalid Saab, he has highlighted many issues. And if we look on these, all the issues, we think that all are important. All are important. What I suggest first, that this center should collect the data that is available in different organizations, because we are all the time talking about this unavailability of data and reliability of data. So I think, and the mandate for this center should be that collect this all the information from all the relevant stakeholders. That will be the first priority, I think, in my opinion.
To my mind, I think the greatest challenge that we face today in view of climate change impacts, I think, and related to what the center can really do is, because as the adage goes, you can't manage what you can't measure. And I think that if we set a target, the country sets a target to save agriculture water use by 3% in 15 years, that would be my first order of priority. So that, and then we set up research to find out exactly where, how, and how to measure.
Sally.
This was my first exposure to the issues of water issues in Pakistan, but in many ways they're similar to water issues in California. And California is the food and nut and vegetable basket of the United States, the majority of vegetables and nuts to the entire world. And we've been under 4 years of drought, due in part to climate change. And what we're beginning to see in our agricultural sector is moving away from flood irrigation to more precision irrigation and precision delivery of fertilizers and so forth. And it not only has benefits and dramatic reduction in water use, but in California we have a terrible problem with salt buildup. And that salt buildup then creates problems because the land needs to be drained, and then you have to dispose of all these salts, which are hazardous and carry lots of fertilizers. So I think something along the lines of really confronting the fact that in the future the water supply for agriculture might be far more uncertain.
Abu Bakr.
I don't think I can pick an issue. I would leave that to Khalid Saab and other experts to tell us what the big issues are. But from what I've seen so far, and you look at any complex system, you first have to really reconstruct what is really going on inside. And I think two of the panelists, they mentioned the issue of measuring something. What I translate that to is the idea of transparency in the basin, meaning that we need to know whatever is going on at every moga, in every canal, every point, every critical point in the glaciers, the groundwater, the evapotranspiration, and so on and so forth. And that would actually enable the transparency.
Wonderful. And to add to this, Abu Bakr didn't mention his own research on the precision canal measurement and canal deliveries. One thing that we're doing at MIT in collaboration with alums is to ask, how can we estimate the difference that these precision measurements of canal flows make for agricultural productivity in different types of distributary contexts and also different types of crop production contexts. So that very pragmatic advance on the work to date the center would be something that we would add to the mix. The point that you mentioned with respect to transparency is an important one in the informatics field, and LUMS has experts in data censorship and internet censorship as well as access. I'd like to ask, because part of the Water Informatics and Technology Center's hypothesis is that increased information and knowledge can affect social change, socioeconomic change. And if you were constructing hypotheses about what types of change could happen through greater data availability, greater data transparency, greater data quality, what sorts of socioeconomic change could be brought about by this informatics work? We'll start with you, and we'll go in the other direction.
The answers to those are pretty obvious. I mean, if you know how the canal colonies were really set up by the British, really to actually extend colonial influence over how they were managing the system, the same sort of political thinking has actually carried over after the independence. So really, how we are managing our water resources, how we are influencing those, how we are bullying each other over getting our fair share and not getting our fair share. I think once the transparency things comes in, that actually immediately translates to at least knowing what the issues are, who are the underprivileged, who are the overprivileged, and who is extending, what sections of the society are extending their political or social influence and who are being deprived of. I think that translation is almost immediate in my mind. And I think there are multiple dimensions of that.
When I listened to your question, I thought about students. There are many students who are really motivated to work on these kind of problems, but a typical undergraduate or master's or PhD, it's very difficult to acquire the data. So if now all of a sudden there's an archive of reliable data on the web, you can serve not only your LUM students, but students from all over Pakistan, or really all over the world, who are interested in these problems. They'll then have access to rich data sets and reliable data sets that they can use as the foundation of their research, which I think leads to a lot of transparency.
Okay, so the precise question would be, if you had extensive data on any one of the issues that you mentioned, how might that data and analysis of it bring about a transformation and benefits that you would expect through the provision of this new data, new analytics that were available for any one of the topics that you had mentioned?
I would think that if we took this as a target, for example, of our national planners, that in view of the impending impacts of climate change and growing population and all of the increasing demands on water that are placed, if we as a national policy set for ourselves a goal, this is going to be greatly a multidisciplinary exercise, because it will involve not only technical solution to saving water, but it will require attitudinal changes that will have to be brought about. For example, today a farmer's view is always, he says, if water is good for agriculture, more is better. How do you get him out of this frame? Similarly, you can think that the community's participation, for example, in any effort, user participation in this is going to be, how are you going to mobilize public opinion in favor of? So it's a multidisciplinary approach that you would use, not only finding technical solution that I'll save 3% water by improving the water courses, for example. No, that's not it. It's not. We tried it, for example, at one time during General Musharraf's time. We said we're going to save 8 million acre feet of water by improving water courses. Nothing happened. We spent all that money, but nothing happened. So it's really many things that you have to do together, and it will be probably a challenge for us to deal with this issue in its entire complexity, and then find both the data that you would need, and it would be helpful for many people. It would be socio-economic data, it would be scientific data, it would be attitudinal data. All of this would be required, and it will have use not only in this center, in many other centers as well.
When we talking about this data availability, accuracy, of course, these are very, very important. And fortunately, we have very good institutes in Pakistan, like IMI did a good job on data collection, and that is a very reliable data and very accurate data. Similarly, WAPDA is also doing a wonderful job collecting on these data. So the data which we need, first I think is the flow data, water availability data. That can be the basis for moving forward for any kind of the development, any kind of the management. And for this, I think this center can play a better role collecting this information from these organizations, even Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, Islamabad, they are also collecting very good information. As far as social data is concerned, of course, very, very important, very, very important. We need to look on this poverty and the social dimensions of the data. But I will suggest that if we just quickly focus on this flow data and rainfall data, that will help a lot for the starting point.
Jim, I think we are one basin which is very, very unique in the world, that we get our entire water flows in 70 days, and we got to utilize them over 365 days, which cries out for large reservoirs. This is what Mr. Khalid Motudullah's presentation also indicated very clearly, that you've got to have very large reservoirs which should allow you to go from a dry year, from a wet year into a dry year, so that you can have sustained supplies. Now, what's been the biggest stumbling factor as far as creation of these reservoirs have been, apart from the technical engineering problems? Mainly it's the mistrust which exists between the provinces. And I think data can bridge that gap, as long as it's reliable and it's untouched by human hands. Now that's very, very important. I'm making this particular clarification because seriously, you can do it. Today, in this part of the world, data by satellite imagery of evapotranspiration is a very, very doable thing. And in actual fact, you can find canals, data of any canal data, where you find the head reaches over-irrigating and underproducing. You find the middle reaches of every canal adequately producing because there's adequate water, and the tail reaches underproducing because of less water being available. Now, frankly, these type of interventions are the ones which are more reliable, which are non-deniable. And that information sharing, and we are very lucky that we've got Mehran University here, which is participating through a member of the advisory board is here. So this information, we need to use the data to decrease the trust deficit. And once we have it, it can be practically used for creating some of these infrastructures. Because if we want to change, the change is going to come because of, we were diverting prior to the Indus Waters Treaty 48 million feet of MF. It was after the Indus Waters Treaty, after these two reservoirs, that your numbers have gone up to, your diversion capacity has gone to 112 or 103 for that practical. If that reservoir had come, it would have been 112 million acre feet of water. So the green revolution was creation of that infrastructure. And in case you want to have a change, then the change will come about through those things. And that is some of the thing which is worthy of this particular center working towards that particular, a slightly higher aim,
And you have the personal experience of the Punjab Irrigation Department canal data, which is online. I don't know how many have actually visited the canal data that are online for every canal command in the Punjab. This is a terrific resource. It's an extraordinary resource, and it opens up the system to all kinds of analysis that, again, researchers can look at as well as stakeholders. And so that's a very concrete and important case study. The point is that each of these potential benefits, societal benefits, whether it's equity, education, economic growth, or trust, are hypotheses. And they can be tested as hypotheses either in an engineering systems or also in collaboration with social scientists. Insofar as those hypotheses can be tested and supported, they then support enormous returns on the investment in further work of that sort. Because anyone who figures out research experiments that enhance trust among communities or provinces or nations is doing something of enormous value, and societies will invest in this. I'll add that there was also, in the case of when some 25 years ago, countries were looking around for examples of complex, large-scale river basins that could address the potential impacts of climate change on water resources. The Indus was selected for several reasons. One was the leadership of Khalid Motadola being the leader of that case study. But two others were that he and his organization made the data available for scientific research. It's not always the case. And also the modeling was of a nature, the Indus Basin model is of a nature that it could analyze the economic effects of climate change scenarios as well as alternative water management scenarios with a level of rigor that was not possible in any other basin in the world. When I took this research back, there was not one river basin in the United States that could do that kind of analysis. So the Indus and Pakistan have a legacy of open data and analysis of it by interdisciplinary teams of scientists. That is a late 20th century legacy waiting and hoping for renewal in the 21st century. It's extremely important. I'd like to shift to a question of institution building. Since we've got a new institution and all who have been involved are great institution builders. And so we'll start at the end with Arif, who's got also a footnote to add, with the question of if you were giving advice to the Water Informatics and Technology Center on a key strategic aspect of its development, what point would you want to suggest as being key to its long-term success? Arif, sorry.
I'd like to just complement what Dr. Sally said about California Valley, and I'd like to take it up from there actually. She said that California as a valley is now gone towards high-value agriculture, and they're investing into things which are giving them excellent dividends. And that's, now frankly in Punjab also one witnesses that the high-efficiency irrigation, we saw a photograph of a laser leveler, which is ensuring that the water stays in the root zone only, which means that the fertilizer also stays in the root zone, and it is not leached below the root zone, which means less input actually, better usage. But I've seen at least a few thousands, I mean I'm talking of 1600 to 1700 farmers were using high efficiency irrigation, and they're beginning about that change here also. The type of change which we're talking of are that each one of them is using top quality seed. Here they're using substrate, which is an inert material, disease free. They are using germination trays because it's 100% germination. Because the quality of seed is high, so high, you know. And they're using techniques like removing the lower parts of the foliage of a plant because God has given each plant more foliage than is actually required. So they want to prevent evapotranspiration, keep it to the adequate levels, have top quality fruit. And the result is that they are 100% conscious, each one of them, that they don't want to use more water than is barely necessary, because excess water drowns the plant. Now, if this sort of a thing is happening, a person owns about 12 acres of land, let's presume that 4 acres gets converted to a high efficiency orchard or a vegetable growing. The rest of the water then becomes adequate, and people stop stealing. That urge to take somebody else's share diminishes, you know. and his understanding of what should be. So frankly, an intervention which is market-led. The center's effort should be, how do we, now this is an intervention which is market-led, which is working market backward. These are the farmers who are not interested in any subsidy whatsoever. They're ready to compete with any in the world because they are technology-driven. They're not interested. They're using soluble fertilizer, which is more expensive, but because it's better placed, it is giving them a yield advantage, They're using 1/4 of it. So, that type of interventions which are market-led are the ones which will be adopted. Whether it's in data, whether it's in interventions, we need to first of all work market backwards, real. It should not be only theory. It should not be assisting the students to acquire a PhD degree primarily. It should be resolving an issue. And that's what my advice would be. Although I mean this tug of war will remain in an academic institution of trying to acquire knowledge for the sake of knowledge also, but it should be a problem-solving issue.
When we talk about strategic direction for this center, there are huge issues. I just give you one example. In 1999 or 98, there was a severe drought in the country, and it went for a couple of years, maybe 3 years. And there was a lot of information that because of this drought, the crop yield suddenly increased in many areas. So that was very clear lesson to the farmer community that when we are using huge amount of water, irrespective of the need of the crop, so the yield is decreased. But when this drought came, then people were using water very precisely. So that was a very good lesson for the community. And these type of the examples, if the center can initiate, for example, what I was discussing with Dr. Abu Bakr, that they have done one study with IMI on this telemetry. That's very important. So it will give us precise measurement of the water, but not only that, it should be linked with the crop yield, it should be linked with the other inputs, so we can set some examples. And then I think that should be our proper direction or strategic direction for this center.
Jim, I personally think that the most important thing that this institute or the center has to strive to achieve is credibility. That everybody should have trust in what this center is producing in terms of data, for example, or scientific outcomes or results that they give. So its credibility must not be compromised at all under any circumstances, number one. Number two, I agree with Arif Saab that for long-term sustainability, we have to, at least in its initial periods, our research and our work must be market-led, in the sense that you have to develop a market for your product before it becomes popular and it becomes validly accepted and people begin to trust it. Some of the important things when you make your personal decisions for procuring, you always say which organization or which manufacturer has good reputation for good service. I think that it's important that they develop credibility. Number two, the strategic issues that they should take up must reflect the needs. And then their work should also be reflective of the expectations of the people whose needs are incorporated in developing a program. This disconnect, for example, between the need and the research that is done in the universities has so far, in this country at least, prevented from developing a open communication and open channel between users and producers of research. That, to my mind, is very, very important. This channel of communication and this trust will only begin when you address their needs through your research, demonstrating the validity and the value addition of your work to them. This at least in the initial years. And then when you become financially comfortable, you can also then do basic research, will strengthen your own scientific urge to improve it. But initially, you have to address market demand.
Would you care to add some of the points that you were making earlier today about the staff college and the types of education in that context that can be transformative for the students, faculty, and the institutions?
I think when we discussed this issue earlier, this was precisely what I had in my mind, that this communication and this interaction between the practitioners and the researchers, this needs to increase. And you, for example, when you talk about this open communication, I also mean capacity building effort. Capacity building effort should take place because you are the ones who are probably the most advantageously placed in providing multidisciplinary knowledge for tackling water issues, because you have access, in-house access to many disciplines that determine ultimately the quality of your research.
What I think has been helpful for us in the past is to really build a community of engaged stakeholders. So who is that community of engaged stakeholders? It's industry, government, water managers, faculty, students, small businesses, the venture community. And you want to create an ecosystem where ideas move quickly and swiftly through that community, where ideas are vetted, so the good ideas rise to the top, the bad ideas get quickly swept aside so you don't waste time. So that's sort of the what. The how is hard, but there are simple things like an annual symposium, a quarterly newsletter. You can have webinars. We found those are quite popular. And really collaborative projects. I think that's the best way to start to develop this ecosystem. And then from the perspective of the people outside the university community is that they learn the students who are working on these projects, and then they recruit them. So you're creating something that has enduring value beyond the projects taking place inside LUMS. So so that's what I'd recommend.
Abu Bakr, your ideas on how to build this center?
Yeah, I have to admit a little bit that I'm a deeply conflicted person. On the one hand, I want to do applied research, but on the other hand, I also want to look at very, very basic issues and things that are very fundamental and very sort of audacious in some sense, which we may not be able to convert into applied research very, very quickly. And really, it is the somehow to come up with that balance of what sort of, so should we just go after low-hanging fruits of what can be done or cannot be done? Because, of course, I think we can do a lot of things that can be very, very impactful, which can probably be easily be done. And if we can't do it, maybe some other institution can do it, still can be done. So should we attempt those sort of things? Or should we go after those more fundamental questions that academics like myself can afford to ponder over for a few years without actually getting the clap or not? I'm not really sure about how that works. In my personal career, I mean, I've swung between the two extremes, really the two extremes. And I kind of know sort of both flavors. But I think we, as a center, we would be actually getting advice, again, checks really, from you guys, from our friends. Well, are you really swinging on one side, or are you really swinging on the other side? I think really it is a balancing act that we need to get right. I probably would not be able to do it because I'm always either here or I'm always either here.
I think that's an honest presentation and of a real kind of creative tension. And that doesn't have to, not something that can be resolved, but something that can be creatively contribute on both sides. My own feeling at this also is that the all of the problems that Khalid Saab had mentioned and that the center will be addressing are need to be thought of on decadal, even multi-decadal timescales that people like me won't be able to even see solved frequently. And for that, it's the students, the current students, who are going to be able to commit not just years but decades to an issue that in institution building, if you think of the students not as short-term problem solvers, but long-term multi-decadal transformers of the Indus Basin system, that would be a aspect of center development. That would be a different philosophy than frequently is the case with our grants that have 1, 2, 3-year timescales. If anyone who's started on a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation on Kalabag Dam, for example, would find that they would be still working on that topic after decades. Other problems might be solved more quickly, but a cohort of students moving into the future will be a cadre of the sorts of people that we see on the stage today, 30 years from now, but in probably a different world. That brings me to the kind of final question that I have for the panel, which is long-term vision. We've talked about very practical types of issues and very pressing types of issues, but I have in my mind that the Indus Basin as a comprehensive river basin is a modern idea, but it maybe doesn't date back too much. Well, maybe Alexander is talking about Sindh Wahind and so on, but there was really many times in which it hasn't been exactly one basin in the mentality of a region. 20th century, that idea developed and it took hold. It was one of the great visions of the 20th century to think of the Indus Basin as a complex, large-scale river basin and one of the great laboratories of civilization and water management. Now that different models of climate change are being run on timescales that go out to 2080, 2100. The timescale for climate change is being modeled in this way, but the timescales, or rather the timescale of imagination, of what the Indus Basin, Pakistan will be in 2080 and 2100 is less well developed. But I thought it would be wonderful to invite our panelists to imagine in that time scale of climate change what Pakistan and the Indus Basin could be, should be, if their imagination were to be realized. Start again, I think, with Arif on the end here.
Thank you, Jim. And I think it's very exciting because once you look at the evolutionary process of some of these irrigation systems all over the world, I mean, the Australians, I mean, that was also built by the British, you know, and it closely resembled the hierarchical structure which we have within this particular country. But the Murray-Darling Basin, if you go there today, if you look at the way it's been run in the most modern manner possible. It's one of the most corporate manners in which it's delivering water to the maximum, where it gets the maximum value actually. So it's only water goes in Australia, which is the driest continent, to horticulture or to dairy. They are the maximum return givers as far as the per drop of water is concerned, you know. And that is why they managed to quadruple their productivity and increase their value for produce 16 times after they stopped diverting water from that. So that's, I mean, something which has been done. It is not something which cannot be done. And it is, if you look at various systems in the world, they have evolved and they've gone from here to there in actual fact. So that is the type of vision we should be. Why are we battling with it today? We did introduce some form of reforms, you know, in which the users, the farmers were put into some sort of I mean, they were given a stake and they were put into this thing. But I frankly feel it will evolve and it is far cry from where we were. So that sort of an ambition is something which we should be looking at in the long term. how can we take this particular system, which was designed in 1893, or 1873? That's the first time you have a look at one of the canal rest houses at Khanki. That's the one, or at Written. Now, 60 years down the road or 70 years down the road, how can you take it beyond, because it had matured. I mean, we inherited something in 1948 and we haven't made much progress beyond that in the next 60 years, Let's see, can we target something where we can modernize the system? And it was designed initially for a thin layer of water for subsistence agriculture. 67% of cropping intensity. Today it already is matching 130% of cropping intensity. It is stretching at its seams. How can we convert that system? And the world has done it actually. So that's the type of target which I think, that's the type of aim we should be having in mind. The technologies, the philosophy, the political, this thing, how to go around developing it in that particular direction.
Great example. Thank you. Let's continue.
Well, I fully agree with Arif Saab. Now, in Pakistan, we have a very best examples. We call it best practices. I was discussing in the morning that if we look at the water productivity in Pakistan, we hardly say average is 0.3 kilograms per meter cube. But look at the scales from lowest level to the highest level. The lowest level is 0.1 kilograms per meter cube and the highest level is up to the 1 kilograms per meter cube. So the potential is there. It means the best practices are there. Similarly, I gave you the example earlier about this drought. When drought came, then people learned a lot from the drought and they use water very precisely. So these examples are there. Similarly, the measurements. I think we have a very strong and robust measurement mechanism of the water. Then we can precisely use this water and optimize our water resources.
I personally feel, as others have said, that there are countries smaller than ours, that countries whose water endowments are about 1/100th of our water resources, and the value of their agricultural production is more than ours. And that tells you of the potential that we have. So my vision is that if we can draw on good practices and good science, and if we can get this science and good practices together, this can become one of the food baskets for the world. And I narrated to you the other day that when I was in IMI, my senior board member used to be Mr. Robert McNamara. And he described this Indus Basin as the world's laboratory for irrigated agriculture. And the emerging issues of secondary salinization at that time alarmed him. And he said that if we go wrong in this, we will go wrong in many places in the world. And we will be jeopardizing one of the food baskets of the world. So the potential exists. The challenge is, and here we've also demonstrated that the productivity per unit of water and per unit of land among progressive farmers and an average farmer is already very large. So one of the challenges is, how do you take these successes to scale? Combined with even better improvements in water use, for example, and other inputs that are used, I feel that we can save so much water in our current usage in agriculture sector that it can meet many times more our requirements of industrial and domestic sectors. So I don't really feel that kind of mortal danger that we'll run out of water, provided we draw on science We draw on good practices, and this has to be done through research. And this has to be done through this open channel between the research institutions and the farming and the water user communities in different sectors. As long as we have these channels open and adequately supported, uh, I feel that we can look to a good future, even in the face of climate change.
I think one of the luxuries that universities have is that they can look far into the future. The workforce at a university is the students, and they, are going to live long into the future, and they can afford to be really visionary because they aren't constrained by, the economics of doing projects today and so forth. So I would challenge you to really think about creating a vision for the Indus Valley water system and other aspects as really a model of sustainable development. Because this river basin does pull together, this enormous community, community of individuals, a cultural community, the system that provides enormous ecosystem services. And really think about creating a system where first it's restored. I'm sure there are all kinds of water quality issues. Try to design a system that uses the water in such a way that you tap a small fraction of what's really available capacity. So in times of shortage and times of drought, when there's less water available, you're taking so much less than you would would come that you don't need to worry about scarcity. Today's water systems, at least in California, every year if we have a bad snowpack, it is really creates terrible consequences for us because we are using it to the very, very limit. So if we could change our thinking that we don't need to use every bit that's there, that if we use far less, that would create security and we would be much more resilient. I think it would also be really great. I don't know if there's ever really been a survey of the ecosystem services that the river system provided that might only be available in historical records. And wouldn't it be wonderful to look at could those be restored? I think how much even people would enjoy having this beautiful services restored and might restore fisheries and so forth. I think the other thing that would be very fascinating to look back is what was the cultural role of the river system, and I always think of this part of the world, and Lahore especially, as water, the water gardens, and wouldn't it be wonderful to really think about this as a tremendous cultural resource. So just imagine what this region could be. And water, as somebody said, who was it? You said that water was the economic driver of Pakistan. And really think about how you could take advantage of this tremendous resource, but as a model of sustainable development.
I probably cannot really foresee what the Indus Basin would be like 50 years, and cannot even wish what I would like it to be. But um, in computer science, there is this idea of computational complexity, that initially something does not matter, and it really matters when things become very large. And then there is this big O notation associated with that, and that lets us think about what will eventually happen. And that, if you really think about it, that is actually a problem of scaling. And I think, I don't know what the future is going to be like, but it is if we can solve those sort of scaling problems. So your population is running away, your problems are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, your climate change variability is going to become larger and larger and larger. The solutions, are they scalable in the sense that while the problems are running away, the solutions are also going to overcome that exponential increase or not? So that scaling would have to be exponential as well. If your problems are exploding, then your scaling has to be exploding as well. And I think in the last maybe century and 20th century that we are living in, the only technology that we have seen which has really exploded or scaled that way are these information technologies. And I think that probably gets us back to this idea of water informatics center. So I don't know, of course, what science would be like in 50 years. Whether we would still be doing electrical engineering, computer science like things in 50 years, I don't know. But at the moment, it seems like that is our best bet. To be able to scale our expertise, to be able to scale our power, our ability to deploy things. I think robots, our ability to sense things. I think about my gadgets, my sensors, and so on and so forth. The algorithms and whatever. So I think that is the way to go about at the moment. But beyond that, I don't think I can think much.
What a fantastic range. And if we put them all together, all of these visions, and we have all of this scaling of technology, information, and algorithms to understand the large data that are going to be available with the cultural significance and the economic productive potential, the societal significance of the basin 100 years hence, we start to get a kind of this multidisciplinary model that we were talking about earlier in the day. And it's a model that will be different, I'm convinced, because we had the example of the image of Shalimar Bagh earlier on. So Shalimar is iconic, it's metaphorical, it's an orderly garden. And some of the colonial irrigation people said, "Oh, we would like this to be like a Garden of Eden," and but they created a system that, as Arif Saab was mentioning, was really a form of protective irrigation, just for famine control, but also for territorial control and resource extraction. That was the 19th century vision, and former professor here, Imran Ali, wrote about this very effectively. The 20th century then became this extraordinary late 20th century vision of optimization and productivity through infrastructure development and economic development of a new nation. And so much was achieved. If you think of those early decades, really it's one of the most inspiring stories of modern water management and development in world history, late 20th century. And even as it too was evolving and bringing in management in strong ways when the infrastructure approach by itself wasn't sufficient, and the whole integrated water resources management that the Global Water Partnership and others helped to formulate were there to bring us into the early 21st century. Do you think 22nd century? One thought that comes to mind, as Sally mentioned it, and that kind of is sparked by the Shalimar Garden case. Is it possible to think of the Indus Basin as a new type of garden? Not as the 20th century said, it's a food machine. The machine metaphor, I think, is completed. That should be set behind us. Even the management paradigm has achieved much. One can go further, and one can imagine a type of garden that's instrumented in all kinds of ways that are inspired by, have continuity with historic gardens. And the gardens today, you go to Gilgit-Baltistan, you go to farmers who are, cultivating as gardeners. I mean, they're tending the land. They have this quality of relationship between the land and the water that's profound and not captured in our academic research to date. But if we start thinking in that way, perhaps we can reinforce those aspects of Indus Basin heritage potential and a future vision that would lead people to say, this is one of the great gardens of the 22nd century. It's just a thought. Thanks, everybody. I've taken careful notes for the director to act upon in his next business meeting. Thanks to everyone in the joining in here. It's better to ask some questions from the audience and to, sir.
I only want to say that our support is there because Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, especially our institute, we before 2 years we restructured, that is Climate Change, Alternate Energy and Water Resources Institute. So I want to share that one of, as our teacher Khalid Musadillah told, that major water resource is the glaciers. snow in the northern region. So our institute has a pioneer in data collecting and developing inventory of glaciers and glacier lakes through ECMOD before 20 years you can say. And in 2014 also we updated those glaciers and glacier lakes. So all these data is being shared with the agencies. And similarly, another point that especially on the farmer field, community scale level, so we developed few interventions during last few years through another USAID project with the collaboration of USDA and Dr. Allah Bakhsh and Lashari Sahib also part of that project. So in different regions, we developed integrated models. Those are addressing, you can say that climate change and energy issue, and then water smart technologies for food production, especially vegetables and horticulture. So due to those, last year before budget, so we put the in front of policymakers those interventions that climate variability is going on and it is affecting our livelihood improvement. So there is a need that especially small farmers, so we need to replace diesel operated pumping system with the solar pumping system. So because 50% especially in Punjab contribution from groundwater and smart water management technology is very important. So government agreed and policies were developed, and last in the budget, this year budget, they announced 30,000 solar tools will be installed within next 3 years. And nowadays we are developing the implementation strategies with our stakeholders all over the Pakistan. So this is also data is being one of the what you can say climate mitigation strategy. If we changed diesel operated pumping system with replaced with solar pumping system.
In addition to, rather in tandem with data collecting, they should also come up with practical approach. I mean, action-oriented strategy like micro irrigations, high efficiency irrigation system that has already been talked about. In high efficiency irrigation system, I mean bubbler, sprinkler, and drip irrigation. These should be introduced because these are the action oriented approach. This can also be translated into the green to blue approach, which is the need of the time, and it should be, I think, considered by the WIT.
I worked in the atomic energy all my life. My name is Shaukat Hamid Khan, then the Planning Commission, then I was Director of GIK. Now I'm with OIC Standing Committee, Science and Technology. Just a few words. We've heard a lot of doom and gloom today. Our population has gone up by nearly 4.5 times since independence. We fed our people most of the time, and we export over 1 million tons of grain every year, sometimes 2 million tons. That's good. And a lot of this has to do with the irrigation system, even though it's badly used. Also has to do with crop genetics, new seeds coming out. In the 1980s, we only produced about 3 million bales of cotton a year. We've touched 15. We hover between 12 and 15 million bales of cotton a year. But coming to one subject that was mentioned earlier, aquifers, and Dr. Mutadullah showed all the details with the good water and the salt water. The atomic energy has a very strong isotope hydrology program, 40 years of pedigree. And when I mentioned Shalimar, what was happening was they're going to rip up the old channels because some of the fountains were blocked. We said, don't do it indiscriminately. So we used scandium glass, pushed it into the water. We knew where the blockages were, and hardly 2% of these channels were opened up and repaired. Beautiful ceramic channels with lead gaskets and so on, going back 400, 500 years. We repaired that. But something else is being done now, which hasn't become public, and I'm not sure whether I should mention this or not. But the water table in Lahore is going down badly, the aquifer, mostly because of indiscriminate pumping on the Indian side. Now, the aquifers don't know any geographic national boundaries. And one of the studies, isotope hydrology studies, shows that brackish water, salt water from the Faisalabad region is flowing into this area. There is no recharge in this area. So what happens 20 years down the line? I shudder to think. Secondly, because we export grain, we have to seriously think about not growing so much rice because we're exporting virtual water with it. My estimate is we export about 2 million acre feet of water every year with the amount of rice that we export. So we need to have water budgets in each area. If the inflows are enough, allow rice to grow there. Don't allow rice to grow in areas which are short of the, let's say, the natural inputs of water. Lastly, sir, glaciers. With the OIC and others, we have a very strong program on water management and water resource management. And glacier monitoring is one of our strong programs. And we are also in touch with the Polar Institute in Norway. That's where the glaciers are. They're doing a lot of good work there. And with GIK, the first place where the glacier melt stops is the Turbela Dam. And with the use of isotope hydrology, the different oxygen isotopes, you can tell old water from fresh rainwater. It's a nice thing. Doesn't cost much. You can have monitoring on the way, coupled with the sensors already in the glacier area set up by WABDA with Bob Hewitt from the University of Waterloo about 20 years ago. So a lot of this can be done. Sir, one other thing about the reuse of water. Some mention has been made recycling. I'm sorry if I missed that part, if somebody's already done that. Karachi, for example, receives 3 million gallons fresh water every day, all discharged into the sea. No recycling, no rehabilitation. Hamburg, 90% of the water, urban water, is reused. Now there's a strong OIC program in this. NIBJ, which is also an atomic energy organization, and they do all sorts of funny things. They have a very strong bioremediation program. They started a 10-acre pond, Faisalabad wastewater, using plants, 4-inch thick polystyrene foam crops, planted on top, and through the, I don't know the process, bioremediation they call it, and cleaning up the water. And some very interesting results. And PARC, I'd just like to add something to what he said. They have a wonderful gene bank which are promoting in the OIC countries. They've also collected the DNA of the crops, wild rice and wild wheat and so on, preserve the biodiversity. I'll just stop here. Thank you.
It is actually use of modern technology to manage water in an efficient and environment friendly way. That's all about Dr. Abu Bakr is trying to do. But I would suggest him that water, is a very critical issue. And there are a number of issues, right? Starting from its sources of water, then its conveyance, all the way through wonderful system, making it available at the farm, using it efficiently. So climate change is another scenario, which as Motazillah Sahab mentioned, it's frequent occurrence of extreme events that could be droughts, that could be very much heavy rainfall. So we need to consider all these. But I would suggest to Dr. Abu Bakr that as water is a multi-dimensional, so you need to seek strength of various institutes in the country in which area they are expert, they are competent. We need to make a forum, we need to coordinate with each other. You need to ask, well, at University of Agriculture, Faisalabad, we have water management research centers. We have Department of Irrigation and Drainage. We have 9 PhDs, on water. We have experts on remote sensing, GIS, modeling. Similarly, there is WRRI. There is in Jamshoro, and in KPK. We need to pull out all these efforts. You need to know that which institute can accomplish which kind of job in an efficient way, So then you can build water informatics.
This is a very exciting and key point of networking and collaboration.
Right. And I should not, forget to mention that climate change is a, phenomena which is affecting water in, different ways. Right from the glaciers, river flows, as Mutilla Sahab mentioned, are decreasing, So, and sometime on the field there's a heavy rainfall. So I would suggest, we need to consider climate change, not only monitoring the glaciers, we need to monitor groundwater also. what is level of its falling water table, and we need to delineate different water districts in the form of maybe green districts, yellow districts, red districts, which are prone to, then we need to manage it artificially by recharging groundwater, you see. So we need to consider all these. I hope, we need to join hands all together.
A wonderful point on which to conclude the panel and the seminar. Abu Bakr, would you like to say any final words? If not, thanks to everyone for joining and to alums for taking on this new initiative. Good work.
Actually, thank you, Jim, and all of the guests who have come here. Jim and Sally, especially, who have actually been lobbying for the center with us for a long, long time. I would like to thank our dean, our chairs, our former dean, who was a relentless supporter of the center, Vice Chancellor Makvi Saab, Babar Saab, especially. Babar Saab was very, very enthusiastic. And so, thank you all for coming. And with this, we come to the end of our